Okay, third graders, so on our last video, we learned how to draw the shape of a head, and we also learned about the proportion lines that we drew. If you haven't had a chance to finish that up, or if you have any questions, just go back to the slide before where this video is, and feel free to review, pause, and stop as many times as you need to. Also, feel free to redraw that as many times as you need to feel comfortable, okay? We're doing some practicing. That's what our sketchbooks are for. So take your time and feel free to restart if you feel like you need to. So in the last video, we talked about the shape of the head. We talked about proportion and how to find the middle of the head as well as the middle for the eyes, half the distance from the eyes to the nose, from the eyes to the chin, pardon me, is the nose. Half the distance from the nose to the chin is where our mouth line is. In this video, we're going to talk about how to draw eyes, and then we're going to take a break for today because we've been doing a lot of drawing together. We talked in our video about eye sockets and about how eye sockets, our eyes sit inside of an eye socket, right? And we kind of tapped and measured on our own face, and we felt that that eye socket is what really holds a lot of parts of our eyes and are going to help us do our drawing. So Miss Rayborn has drawn in one of my eye sockets, and notice I did the same thing I did with my head. I kind of started in a very sketchy way up at the top, and I didn't draw one big circle because I wasn't going to be able to make it roundish. This circle or eye socket is on the center of the line for the eyes in the middle of the head, okay? So I'm going to go slow as I draw the next one. So I'm going to kind of give myself a little line across so that I know where the top of this one is. And I'm going to give myself a little line across so I know where the bottom of this one is. That's going to help me keep things symmetrical. So I'm starting up here at the top. And again, I'm being kind of sketchy with my movements. I'm going slowly, and I'm not drawing with one big line all the way around. We talked about how that doesn't work out very well. I'm going slowly so that I can adjust and make any corrections. Also, I can erase away any of those lines that don't really fit. I would, if I were you, try to make this kind of light because you are going to be erasing these away. I'm drawing darker than I probably normally would because I want to be able to see, to be sure that you that are at home can see those lines so that you can understand, right? If I draw too lightly, it will be hard for people to see. So my first job was to draw in my two eye sockets. Looks a little bit silly at this point in time, but we measured and tapped around on our own face, and we could tell that this eye socket really is quite large. It tells us a lot of things about where our eyebrow is, where our cheeks are down here in this edge. So make sure you don't make them too small, okay? This is a great time to go ahead and press the pause button if you need to and get yourself caught up to this spot. Remember, you can always rewatch the video if you need to or want to. Okay, so get that started. Press play when you're ready for what's next. All right, so we've got our two eye sockets and they're centered on the center line of our head, which is where our eyes go. We drew our large eye sockets. They look a little silly, but we know what they're for. We felt that on our face in our first video for today. So now we're gonna draw 3 circles, and I'll explain what each of them is. The first one is about half the size of the original outside eye socket. This is the actual eyeball. This is the white part of the eye, okay? So it's about half the size of this original one. Notice that I also went kind of lightly and I drew kind of with a sketchy line so that I wasn't worried about making it perfectly round the first time around, okay? So again, this one right here is, and I'll label for you, this is the eyeball, this part, the white part of your eye, okay? When you have that drawn in, go ahead and press play, pardon me, for the next one. So the next thing in, kiddos, is your iris. The iris is the colored part of your eye, okay? And again, I drew it a little bit big or a little bit dark, and I can erase away any mistakes I make, but I want you guys to be able to see my lines. So this is the second part here. I'll label it for you, is the iris or the colored part of the eye, okay? The last one that I'm gonna draw is the pupil. Now, a pupil changes in size all day long because it lets in the light to your eye. So if you're outside, your pupil will get very small because it's probably very bright if it's during the daytime. If you're inside or in a dark movie theater, your pupil will open up and it will get much wider because it needs to let more light in. So the size of a pupil is actually, it changes probably hundreds of times a day, maybe thousands actually, right? So it's kind of up to you, the size of your pupil. The one thing I would recommend is that you leave a little spot of your pupil white. And I'll hold this up and show you what I mean. Do you see how I left one little spot uncolored in right here? That's because I wanted a little highlight in my eye, okay? It's a trick that my art teacher, Mr. T, taught me when I was a little girl. So go ahead and take care of that. I'll label for you. This is the pupil. So go ahead and take care of those 3 circles. The eyeball, about half the size of the whole eye socket, right? That's starting to look more like the right size. The iris, which is the colored part. This can be a little tricky. Maybe I'll add some shading to it so that it looks like what we recognize it to be. This is the colored part of the eye, which usually has kind of a line pattern to it. And then the pupil, which is the darkest part, and I gave myself a little highlight. So take care of those 3 things, and then when you're ready, go ahead and press play. All right, kiddos, this is gonna start to look like an eye pretty quickly. Right now it looks a little silly, but we're gonna get there pretty fast. So let's talk about, I'm gonna erase away a few of these guidelines that I did to show you. I'll leave the labels out there, but I just want you to be able to see the edges. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a connection from the top of the eyeball to the inside line of the eye socket. Now, to the inside line, it's usually a bit more rounded, you might notice. And then when I connect to the outside, here's the outside of my eye socket, there it was. So I'm going across the bottom of the eyeball and out to that line, okay? Now, we know that this looks a little too large right now, right? It looks like our eyes are huge. That's because we've still got some work to do. You don't see your whole eyeball, a whole circle, when you look at someone. You see only part of it because of an eyelid. So go ahead and get yourself caught up to this spot, rounded to one side, pointed to the other side. It goes all the way to the edge of the eye socket here, all the way to the edge of the eye socket out here. When you're ready, press play for the next part. All right, kiddos, so we said you wouldn't see the whole part of this eyeball, right? You would only see part of it because you have an eyelid on top of here. So we're gonna go across the top of the iris and connect to that outer edge of your eye socket on the top. And then I'm also gonna do one on the bottom. Now, some people, you can see their whole iris. Others, it's a little thinner than that. It might cut off part of it and it goes across. If you have a mirror, you could look inside of one. You could also just make a choice of what you want to do during this time for this practice, okay? So the next thing I did is I drew the line for the eyelid, and it went from the top of the iris to the outside of the eye socket, top of the iris outside, and then from the bottom of the iris to the outside of the socket and across. So go ahead and pause until you get that done. Press play when you're ready for some erasing directions. Okay, so right now this looks a little crazy, but let me show you what's going to happen when we start to do some erasing. Before you do that, I would encourage you to go ahead and give yourself an eyebrow. An eyebrow goes on the top of the eye socket. Okay, kiddos, so sorry for the loud alarm. It was almost time for a class. So we're to the point where we get to start doing some erasing, which is gonna be great. I'm hoping you guys are really gonna start to see this start to look like an eye. Ms. Rayborn is gonna kind of zoom myself in so that you can see a little bit better what I'm erasing and talking about. So now that we have drawn the outside part of the eye, here and here, which went on the top and the bottom of the eyeball, then we drew the eyelid, which covers part of the eye. When we look at an eye, we don't see the whole eyeball. There's an eyelid covering part of it, right? So we drew in that shape on the top and on the bottom. Now we get to start doing some erasing. We can erase away the circle part of the eyeball on the top and on the bottom because we can't see that at all, right? It's covered up by your eyelid. The other thing that I like to kind of partially erase is that top outer line, which is the area where your eyelid is. Now, usually you still see a little bit of that line. It's sort of being alluded to on top. The other thing that usually hides part of this line, your eyelid line, is that you've got eyelashes on your eyes. Now, occasionally I see people start to draw their eyelashes like they're big sticking up things like this, right? That is not what eyelashes look like. So let's talk about how to draw eyelashes. Eyelashes will start not from up here, but from here, the lower lid. And I like to draw them kind of out and away. So I learned this technique about drawing grass when I was a kiddo. And I learned to put my pencil down and to just lift it up like this. And I do the same thing, except I give it a little bit of kind of a curve. Now, notice that the eyelashes on top are a little bit longer, right? The eyelashes on the bottom aren't gonna be quite as long. They're also kind of slow. They're a little lower. There's a few less of them. That one was too long. And it kind of goes down and away. The other things that you can erase are the lines for the eye socket on the top and also the lines for the eye socket on the bottom. So this part can all go away. So now you have something that looks a lot more like an eye. There's the eyeball. We've got the iris, or the colored part of the eye, and then the pupil. So this is looking a lot more like the eye that we know. Some people even like to draw in the little tear duct in the edge of their eye. Up to you. Okay, so we've worked really hard on our drawings for today, and we're gonna stop there. On our next time together, we will talk about how to draw the nose, how to draw the mouth. We'll talk about ears, we'll talk about hair, how big your neck should be, but we've worked really hard today. So give yourself a pat on the back. You've done 2 of the hardest parts of drawing a face. 1, drawing the lines for the proportion by measuring, and 2, the eyes. The eyes are very, very tricky. So do a little more practicing on your second eye, and then pack up your sketchbook for this week and enjoy a little bit of a rest. You've worked really hard. Bye for now.